In 1925, grave robbers in China blew open an imperial tomb, found the body of a Ming dynasty noblewoman so astonishingly preserved that she still had skin and hair, and then a foreign doctor took her corpse away for study as the country erupted in outrage. It sounds like Gothic fiction, it sounds like a cursed mummy story transplanted into modern Beijing. But this happened in the real, collapsing, furious world of early 20th century China, where dynastic ruins, foreign intrusion, warlord politics, and modern science were colliding in ways that felt electric and humiliating all at once. The setting is just outside Beijing at the Ming tombs, the immense necropolis where emperors of the Ming dynasty were buried beneath forested hills and carefully planned spiritways. For centuries, these tombs had stood as monuments to imperial majesty and sacred ancestry. But by the 1920s, China is no longer the old empire that built them. The Qing dynasty is gone. The republic is fractured. Warlords dominate provinces. Foreign powers still hold enormous influence. Intellectuals are fighting over what China must preserve and what it must destroy in order to survive the modern age. In other words, this is exactly the kind of moment when opening an ancient tomb becomes much more than archaeology. It becomes a political explosion. In 1925, a local warlord's forces and tomb plunderers targeted one of the Ming imperial burial sites associated with the Wanli Emperor and his court. Accounts from the period describe the desecration of the burial complex and the shocking discovery inside. Among the remains was the body of a young woman, often identified in contemporary reporting as Lady Xin, a concubine or noblewoman connected to the tomb complex, preserved so remarkably that witnesses were stunned. This wasn't a skeleton. This was a human being who looked, in unnerving ways, as if death had happened yesterday instead of centuries earlier. Her features were still visible, skin and hair reportedly remained. She became, instantly, a sensation. And that's where the story tips from morbid to explosive. A foreign physician in Beijing, working within the world of modern medicine and scientific collecting that had spread through treaty port China and foreign institutions, obtained the body for study. To some in that scientific world, this was an extraordinary specimen, a chance to examine preservation, disease, anatomy, maybe even material conditions of elite Ming life. But to many Chinese observers, this was not science. It was desecration stacked on top of desecration. First the tomb is violated, then the dead are handled like curiosities. Then a Chinese woman from the imperial past is effectively carried off into foreign hands while the nation watches. You can feel why the story detonated. This is the 1920s, when Chinese newspapers are full of debates about national humiliation, sovereignty, cultural survival, and foreign arrogance. The body of Lady Xin becomes more than a corpse. She becomes a symbol. A teenage girl from the Ming dynasty, dead for centuries, is suddenly at the center of a modern argument about who owns China's past. Is it local muscle with dynamite? Scholars? The state? Scientists? Foreigners? No answer comes cleanly, because everyone involved is compromised by the chaos of the age. The looters are obvious villains, but the officials who failed to protect the tombs are part of the same crumbling system. Reformers who champion science now face the question of whether science without dignity is just another form of plunder. Foreign experts who claim scholarly interest are operating in a country where foreign seizure of land, customs revenue, railways, legal rights, and artifacts is still a raw political wound, and ordinary readers looking at reports of a preserved young woman taken from an imperial grave are not seeing a neutral research opportunity. They are seeing China itself being picked apart. The emotional force of the story was amplified by the body's condition. It is one thing to hear that bones were found in a tomb. It is another to imagine a face, hair, flesh, clothing, maybe even fingernails emerging from the coffin after centuries underground. Witnesses reportedly reacted with awe and revulsion. She felt too present, too human, too recent. The dead were supposed to belong to ritual, memory, and ancestors, not to newspapers, laboratories, gawking visitors, or opportunistic men with chisels. This is the irony at the heart of the story. The same era that claimed to be rescuing China through modern knowledge often looked, to many Chinese citizens, like an era in which the country's treasures and even its dead were being stripped of dignity under the banner of expertise. Outrage spread. Press coverage turned the desecration into a national issue. Cultural figures and reformers condemned the looting. The scandal fed broader calls for heritage protection and stronger control over antiquities. What made it so potent was that this wasn't just about an object, it was about bodily violation. A person, a young woman from the imperial past transformed into evidence, spectacle, and political metaphor. You can almost see the headlines, hear the debates in tea houses and lecture halls. If China cannot even protect its emperor's tombs, what exactly is left of national sovereignty? If modernity means blowing open graves and exporting corpses, is that progress or surrender? The exact details in contemporary reports can be messy, as often happens in periods of upheaval, and later retellings sometimes blur archaeology, rumor, and political symbolism. But the larger reality is firmly grounded. The desecration of Ming tombs in the Republican period caused major outrage, and the treatment of preserved remains became part of a larger national argument over science, plunder, and cultural identity. That argument mattered. It fed into the emerging conviction that China's antiquities were not just relics for private curiosity or foreign institutions, but part of a national inheritance requiring protection. In that sense, the scandal belongs to the same modern history as campaigns to recover looted art, regulate excavation, and define cultural patrimony in law. The climax of the story is not a supernatural curse or a hidden treasure. It is the moment the dead girl ceases to be anonymous remains and becomes a national wound. Dragged from a royal tomb into a Republican crisis, Lady Xin, if we use the name that circulated in public memory, was turned into a symbol of everything fragile and violated in modern China: dignity, continuity, control over the past, and the right to decide what science should look like on Chinese soil. And the payoff is enormous, because this grotesque episode sits right at the intersection of forces that would define China's 20th century. Anti-imperial anger, contested modernization, the politics of heritage, and the weaponization of the past in public life. A body from the Ming dynasty becomes a modern political event. That is almost impossible to invent. And maybe the strangest part is how often stories like this vanish behind cleaner narratives of reform, revolution, and nation building. We hear about treaties, parties, armies, manifestos. We hear less about the moments when a nation's deepest anxieties erupt around a coffin. But sometimes, history reveals itself most clearly there, in the treatment of the dead. Who is protected? Who is displayed? Who is claimed in the name of knowledge? Who gets to decide what respect looks like? In 1925, one young woman who should have remained undisturbed in an imperial tomb was hauled into the center of those questions. And the centuries after her death, she helped expose what modern China feared most: not just losing its future, but losing ownership of its own past. And if that same scandal happened today, an ancient body, removed, studied, photographed, fought over, would we call it science, theft, or something far more uncomfortable in between?